Hello, folks. Today we are going to look at whether the Gospels were falsified by the Church in the Middle Ages, or whether they are a reliable source about the life of Jesus. The oldest known manuscripts of the Gospels date from the 2nd century AD, around 100 years after the original texts were written. The most important and oldest manuscripts include Papyrus 52, p. 52, a tiny fragment of the Gospel of John, John 18 verses 31 to 33, 37 to 38, dated to around 125 AD. This is the oldest known fragment of a New Testament text. Papyrus 66, p. 66, a nearly complete manuscript of the Gospel of John from the early 2nd century. Papyrus 75, p. 75, contains large parts of the Gospel of Luke and John, dated to around 175 to 225 AD. Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, two of the oldest near-complete manuscripts of the New Testament, from the 4th century. The manuscript tradition shows that although there were copying errors and minor changes over time, there was no deliberate falsification of the basic message of the Gospels. Textual criticism, a scientific method for examining the transmission of manuscripts, shows that most of the changes were rather accidental copying errors or marginal theological adjustments, but not massive manipulations. In the Middle Ages, the Church certainly had a great influence on how the Bible was disseminated and interpreted. However, by comparing many old manuscripts that are accessible today, it can be proven that the Gospels have remained largely unchanged since their earliest copies. There are also Old Testament writings that have been found. Here are two examples. The Qumran Scrolls, Dead Sea Scrolls, 3rd century BC, 1st century AD, contain many books of the Old Testament, especially Isaiah, the Psalms, the Book of Daniel, etc. These writings are older than Jesus and show that the Jewish biblical text was already fairly stable before the emergence of Christianity. Septuagint, 3rd to 2nd century BC. The oldest Greek translation of the Old Testament. It was the most important Bible for the first Christians and is often quoted in the Gospels. Both the Septuagint and the Qumran Scrolls show that the biblical text has been handed down largely unaltered, even if there are some differences and variants. The biblical texts have remained surprisingly stable. One example is the large Isaiah scroll from around 200 BC, which is almost identical to the Masoretic text from the 10th century AD. Only minor deviations such as spelling variants or word changes. Let's also take a look at where skeptical scholars date the Gospels. It has to be said that many of these people are not believers. Simply because Jesus prophesied the destruction of the Jewish temple, which happened in 70 AD, the researchers date the Gospels after this year, because according to them there can be no real prophecy. According to these scholars, the four Gospels of the New Testament were probably written between around 65 and 100 AD, i.e. a few decades after the events surrounding Jesus. Here is a rough classification. 1. The Gospel of Mark, ca. 65 to 70 AD. Probably written between 65 and 70 AD. Many researchers believe that it was written shortly before or after the destruction of the Temple in Jerusalem, 70 AD. 2. The Gospel of Matthew, ca. 75 to 90 AD. A Gospel for Jewish Christians. Between 75 and 90 AD, possibly after the destruction of the Temple. Contains many words of Jesus, e.g. Sermon on the Mount. 3. The Gospel of Luke, ca. 80 to 90 AD. Probably written between 80 and 90 AD. 4. The Gospel of John, ca. 90 to 100 AD. Between 90 and 100 AD, probably in Ephesus. Style and theology differ greatly from the other three, so-called synoptic Gospels. Even according to these dates, eyewitnesses who saw and experienced Jesus were definitely still alive at this time, including some who witnessed the resurrection themselves. These dates therefore show that the Gospels are not just any old books that were written in the Middle Ages and then later falsified. Even skeptics and atheists date these books to the time of Jesus and show that they were not falsified. Let's take a look at the manuscripts of the Gospels. There are over 5,800 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. There are over 25,000 manuscripts in various languages, Latin, Coptic, Syriac, etc. Significance. Very early transmission compared to other ancient works. Many manuscripts allow textual criticism in order to reconstruct the original text very precisely. Let's compare this time with Julius Caesar's De Bello Gallico, the Gallic War. Only around 10 manuscripts have survived. The oldest copy dates from the 9th century AD, i.e., approximate 1,000 years after Caesar. The gap between Caesar's original text, ca. 50 BC, and the oldest copy is huge. Nevertheless, no one seriously doubts the authenticity of his works. Here we see that the New Testament does extremely well here, and that the texts are very credible.